But that's a very big question, Renee.
There are lots of elements to your question.
Whoa, that's a great question. Renee, what is made possible by the geography and architecture of Ravika? What do these worldings make possible for the writer, as well as the inhabitants across your trilogy? The yellow air, the bridge, the hotel, the language, the buildings, the affects.
The geography in Ravika is really, it was this emergence of thinking about actually trying to imagine like a country for these people, like a landscape for them. And what I learned really early in the writing of these books is that the architecture or the crises that happen in the architecture, that's what produces the momentum in the writing. So there's always a sense of needing to cross space, and often to cross space to tend to some geographic entity or problem or possibility. But I feel that my characters learn a lot from having to encounter the buildings, or having to think about the water that is gone, or think about the mountains or the winds. And those are all sort of affecting the direction of their day and the direction of their movement. For Kate, are there any practices or problems or fascinations within translation that would be productive if pulled through other forms of writing or art production? Can you talk us through a couple of them?
Thank you, Renee, for your question. When I think of translation practice, I don't think of it as a bounded practice. I think of it more as a kind of composite activity, kind of made up of a whole array of different actions and gestures and practices, which I think are already running through so many other areas of activity. To talk through some of them, reading would be an obvious one. You know, reading is one of the composite layers of translation. Writing would be another one. Attention, a certain kind of form of attention. A willingness to take on the fate, if you like, of a work that you didn't produce yourself. And I think what I was trying to do in this little art was actually to kind of do something, some of the work that you're suggesting, of kind of pulling them out, separating them out, but in order to then kind of recompound them back together. Because I think we have translation in the recognizable or conventional sense when all of those layers are kind of compounded and made thick together. So when you have reading and writing and attention and reproduction or representation and responsibility, among others.
Renee, I wonder if you could respond to this question. What, if any, relationship does your work have to a responding readership? Is that a necessity for you? Or are you writing from within a kind of an enclosed set of references?
I think it's really hard to make enclosed sets of references because everything is always opening outward. I'm really happy to have readers, and I think that's really important. And I think because I've been writing so long, I must be aware that, you know, that these are works that will be read and will be responded to. But I think for me, the wonder of writing is less about that connection than about what it feels like to write, what it feels like to imagine in a fictional space, or in a progressing space, or in a linear space. And I think that's what's more exciting to me, or what's most exciting is that experience of being in my body in this place and time, producing text, producing narrative or sentences. This question is for Michael. Can you talk about the ways in which the page and the stage resonate for you as respective spaces? How do you experience them? Are they static, commotional, always already in motion? How are they different? How are they similar?
The page and the stage for me are very different because one is much smaller than the other, and yet both of them are a reflection of one another, and they have different scale to them. And so but I feel like I approach both of them in the same way, from like a place of inquiry and of discovery. And so but I have a different timeline that I'm working with for both of them. With an empty page, I could be working on a show for 18 years, as I did with my musical Strange Loop, whereas the production was, from the rehearsal to production was like a month. So my sort of stamina and my sort of approach might be more or less aggressive depending on both the scale and the timeline that I'm working with both spaces.
Kinesia, if you had to present on the space of the poem space, at an architectural conference, how would you make that topic enterable or navigable for architects?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think about architects unless unless I have reason to think about architects. I guess you use the page as landscape. What are the landmarks for the various points of feeling through the poem, and what does that do in an actual 3D physical space? What would that look like? Maybe that. But that's a very big question, Renee. Ask me again sometime, I might have a different answer.
Renee, what's your favorite line from a piece of poetry or prose?
This is from Danielle Vogel's Between Grammars. It says, the reader hears something calling, an inlet, a pull-off into the world. I love that, a pull-off into the world. This question is for Dion. As someone who writes through multiple genres, namely the essay, poetry, and fiction, what do you think each of these forms of writing can learn from the other? For example, what can fiction learn from what poetry does, and so on? Would you want a form in which all these genres were enacted simultaneously? And if so, what would you use it for?
I think all these forms are about frequencies, right? For me, the different forms inform or enact a certain frequency. And I think most of all for me, because I began as a poet, poetry informs all of these different genres in some ways, right? I wanted to do in these different genres what poetry does, yeah? So poetry brings more muscularity, for me, at any rate, to each of these genres. So in terms of fiction, when I write fiction, I didn't want to write fiction that was simply schematic or expository. I wanted to use the work of language in fiction. And the work of language comes out of how the different things that poetry does, right? The triple, quadruple meanings that poetry can enact. And I wanted to figure out how to do that in prose, in fiction. So I think these are the things that they lend each other, and I think I employ them depending on the frequency of the note or the frequency of the sound that I want to make. Now, do I want them all together? Not yet. And perhaps not, at least in my own work. I still kind of respect them as disciplines, yeah, in some ways. I simply want to see what the play among them might be.
Renee, Derek Walcott in Map of the World wrote, quote, "At the end of this sentence, rain will begin. What of the world appears for you in your vision of your craft?"
Oh, wow. I think the thing that is, for me, most present from the world in my writing is the utter offness of the relationship of what we do in time with our thinking about having done it or our awareness of it happening. The fact that we are often or always, just by nature of how language works in relation to thinking behind ourselves, and the way that just affects and explodes everything when you come to write. It just messes up time, it messes up memory. And I think that a lot of us are confused. I really feel like confusion is a huge part of human beingness. And so that's something that I really covet in my writing is the feeling of not knowing and using not knowing or confusion as a mode of perception. So the part of the world that we don't know and that is confusing is what I hope is most in my work.